Think about the last time you were driving down the interstate, like 70 miles an hour.
Right, just totally focused on the road.
Yeah, you're checking your mirrors, maybe, adjusting the radio. And out of the corner of your eye, like a quarter mile down the road, you see this massive shape on a pole.
Just a blur of color at that point.
Exactly. But before you can read a single letter on that sign, honestly, before your brain has even registered the geometric shape of the logo, you already know exactly what building is coming up at the next exit.
You know what the fries taste like.
Yes. You've already decided whether or not you're pulling over. I mean, you made this super complex consumer decision in a fraction of a second, entirely subconsciously. And why? Because your brain was just hacked by a specific wavelength of light.
It's an incredibly efficient biological shortcut, actually. The brain just, it bypasses language processing entirely. It goes straight to associative memory, triggered by, nothing more than a precise shade of yellow and red.
And that invisible hand, right? The one guiding your eye and making decisions for you before you're even aware of them. That is what we are unpacking today. Welcome to the deep dive.
It's going to be a fun one.
Oh, absolutely. We are taking a shortcut for you to master what is arguably the most crucial yet entirely subconscious visual language we interact with. We're extracting the core insights from a highly technical, just absolute fascinating source today.
Yeah, Chapter 04, Organizing with Color.
Right, from the Design Elements Color Fundamentals Graphic Style Manual.
Which is, it's a foundational text for a reason. What it does so brilliantly is strip away the romanticism we usually attach to color.
Oh, for sure. We always think of it as art.
Exactly. We tend to think of color as art, as poetry, or, pure aesthetics. But this chapter just throws that out the window.
Yeah.
It looks at color purely as utility. It's an organizational tool. It is infrastructure.
Which is exactly why anyone listening to this needs to care, even if you've never opened Adobe Illustrator in your life.
Yeah, it applies to everything.
Yeah. Right. Whether you are a founder trying to format a pitch deck that will actually keep investors awake, or, a project manager trying to organize a chaotic spreadsheet so your team doesn't miss a deadline.
Or just someone who is insanely curious about how the built environment manipulates your attention.
Yes, every single second of the day. This chapter is the playbook. Because once you understand the matrix of how color organizes information, you start seeing the strings attached to everything around you.
You really do. You realize that you aren't just, casually choosing to look at things. Your attention is being highly choreographed.
It's slightly terrifying.
A little bit, yeah. The manual establishes this very fun premise right out of the gate. Color is the very first thing the human brain processes when it encounters any new piece of visual media, period.
I want to dig right into that sequence, actually, because the chapter lays out this literal hierarchy of sensory processing that completely upended how I thought we read the world.
It changes your perspective for sure.
Because we are walking around in a state of constant low-level sensory overload. I mean, our retinas are being bombarded by thousands of ads, screens, packages, signs.
We physically don't have the cognitive bandwidth to handle it all.
Right, we can't process it. So the brain has developed an evolutionary triage system for visual data. It has to filter the noise instantly to figure out, what is a threat, what is a resource, and what is just irrelevant.
And according to the manual, step 1 of that triage, the absolute first thing that hits the brain is color.
Just color, not the shape.
Just color. Then step 2, we process images and shapes. Step 3, we start looking for recognizable brand markers or, symbols.
Okay.
And finally, step 4, dead last, we actually get around to reading the text.
The actual message that some poor copywriter spent 3 weeks agonizing over is dead last.
Dead last.
Yeah.
But when you look at it through the lens of evolutionary psychology,
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense. Well, long before we had written language or corporate branding or complex urban environments, our survival depended on identifying color from a distance against complex backgrounds.
Oh, like looking for food.
Exactly. You needed to spot the ripe, calorie-dense red fruit hidden inside this chaotic canopy of green leaves. Or you needed to instantly recognize the specific yellow and black banding of a venomous snake hidden in the brush.
Right, so color was literally a survival beacon. It meant food or death.
Yeah, exactly.
So that biological hardwiring is still driving the bus when I'm looking for a Target store on the highway?
Absolutely. The text touches on this directly, actually. Red has one of the longest wavelengths on the visible spectrum.
Okay, getting into the physics of it.
Yeah, just briefly. Physics dictates that it scatters less in the atmosphere than shorter wavelengths, like blue, for instance. So it physically punches through visual noise, fog, and distance, better than almost anything else.
Oh.
You see that specific bullseye red from hundreds of feet away, and your brain's pattern recognition software just instantly retrieves target.
That makes total sense. The manual quotes this famous kind of cynical quip from the art world that I just can't stop thinking about. It says, if you can't make it big, make it red.
It's blunt, but it speaks to a really profound truth about distance, visibility, and how we hack that sensory hierarchy.
It makes me think of color as like a bouncer at a very exclusive nightclub.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right, and your conscious attention is the VIP trying to get in. The color is standing out on the street. It catches your eye from a block away.
Yeah, doing the heavy lifting.
You walk up, and the bouncer decides whether you're even going to stop and look through the windows, which is step 2, right, the imagery. And only if the bouncer lets you pass the velvet rope do you actually go inside and hear the music, which is step 4, reading the actual message. If that initial flash of color doesn't stop you, you just keep walking down the street.
That's a highly accurate way to visualize the cognitive flow, because the color is acting as a semiotic cue.
Semiotics, right. Remind me, that's symbols.
Yeah, semiotics being the study of how signs and symbols create meaning. So the color stands in for a whole set of ideas, directions, or emotional states before a single syllable of text is ever consumed.
Okay, but I want to push back on that make it red idea for a second.
Sure.
If the goal is to act as a bouncer and stop people in their tracks, the instinct is just to, paint the entire nightclub neon red.
Oh, definitely. The louder the better, right?
Right, but the manual gives an example that proves you don't need a massive amount of color to completely arrest someone's attention. Let's talk about that poster design by Finn Nygaard from Denmark.
Yes. This is a brilliant counterpoint to the whole make it red assumption. What Nygaard demonstrates is the psychological power of restraint and strategic placement.
Yeah, the manual describes this poster as having a dramatic advantage, but when you look at it, the vast majority of the canvas is just pure, empty white space.
Just a massive, imposing expanse of nothing.
Exactly. And somewhere floating in that white void is a tiny hint of imagery. Just 2 hyper-realistic circular cutouts of human eyes. One is tinted a cold blue, the other is stark black and white, and they're just staring at you.
It's very unsettling.
Super unsettling, and the typography shoved way down into the bottom corner, almost like an afterthought.
Right, and if the designer had stopped there, it would be a very quiet, almost invisible piece of media in a busy urban environment. It would lack the tripwire needed to initiate that first step of the sensory hierarchy.
But then he addresses the edges.
He takes the absolute outer borders of the poster, these irregular, torn-looking edges, and lines them with these razor-thin, vibrating layers of highly saturated primary colors.
Just a sliver of bright red.
Yeah, overlapping a sliver of blue, green, yellow, and orange. It looks almost as if several pieces of brightly colored construction paper are stacked haphazardly right behind the white poster, just peeking out.
So how does a sliver of color that makes up maybe, 2% of the total surface area command so much attention?
It relies on how peripheral vision works. The human eye has a high concentration of rod cells on the periphery, which are incredibly sensitive to movement and high contrast.
Oh, wow.
So when this poster is plastered on a busy brick wall in Copenhagen, that vibrating sliver of neon color on the edge catches the peripheral vision instantly. It acts as a visual trap.
A visual trap. I love that.
It physically forces the head to turn. And once the viewer stops, once the bouncer has their attention, that massive silent white space provides a cognitive resting place.
Right. It pulls the eye inward.
Exactly, toward those tiny, intense eyes, and finally down to the text. So the color didn't need volume, it just needed tactical placement to hack the peripheral reflex.
That is fascinating. It's almost predatory in how it traps the eye.
It is.
But let's look at the opposite end of the spectrum. What if the environment you are creating is intentionally chaotic?
Okay, yeah.
There's another example in this section, a poster by Billy Bacon from Rio de Janeiro, that just looks like pure noise at first glance.
Oh, the Pasmato poster. It's a highly distressed, grungy, punk rock aesthetic.
Totally. You have typography scrawled sideways, spelling out the word Pasmato.
Yeah.
Little scratchy illustrations of hands sawing wood, numbers scattered seemingly at random, multiple competing fonts.
It feels like the kind of design where your eye just slides right off because it has no idea where to land.
Sensory overload. But the manual points out that Bacon uses color to anchor the chaos and actually guide you through it.
He creates a hidden structural spine using one specific color. At the very top of the poster, there is a bold, textured shape in a striking shade of cyan blue.
Okay.
And at the very bottom of the poster, grounding the whole thing, is a thick horizontal band in that exact same cyan blue.
Right. And then, scattered throughout the chaotic middle section, right behind the scattered numbers 1, 2, and 3, are small, solid circles of that same blue.
This taps directly into Gestalt psychology,
Bring on the psychology.
specifically the law of similarity. Our brains are desperate pattern-matching machines. We are constantly looking for relationships to make sense of chaos.
So when the eye enters that poster,
The first thing it registers, step 1 of the hierarchy, is the cyan blue at the top. Because the brain wants to resolve the pattern, the eye automatically jumps to the next instance of cyan blue, which is the circle behind the number 1.
oh, I see.
Then it jumps to the cyan circle behind the 2, then the 3, and finally rests at the cyan band at the bottom.
He literally built a stepping stone path out of color.
Exactly. He organized the reading order and established relative balance without using a single arrow, line, or box. The color is doing the heavy lifting of structural organization while allowing the illustrative elements to remain chaotic and expressive.
It's like leaving visual breadcrumbs.
Yeah, exactly like that.
And then there's the semiotic weight of color, which the manual highlights with a poster by Jesus Rodriguez.
That one is powerful.
Yeah, it shows how color doesn't just guide the eye, it sets the entire emotional vocabulary of the message before you even realize what you're looking at.
It's an incredibly stark vertical composition. The background is a pitch black void. Right in the center is a graphic illustration of a hand, spread open.
But the hand looks fluid, right?
Yes, almost like it's made of water, and it's rendered in this chilling, icy, desolate blue. And dripping off the fingers of this blue hand is thick black fluid. Superimposed over the hand is a dark, heavy gray circle with a diagonal line through it. The universal symbol for no or stop.
You look at that and your stomach instantly drops, you feel the weight of it. The manual explicitly states that the black and the blue reference oil and the ocean, specifically an ocean suffering an oil spill.
But think about the cognitive mechanics of why that works so instantly. The coldness of that specific blue against the endless heavy black immediately triggers associations with depth, cold, and tragedy.
It just bypasses intellectual processing completely.
Right, it hits the emotional center of the brain. If that hand were rendered in a warm, inviting yellow or a vibrant pink, the entire emotional resonance would shatter.
The viewer would be so confused.
The color is the primary message. The no symbol and the dripping oil just confirm what the color already told you.
Which brings us perfectly to the trap.
Ah, the trap.
Because once people realize how powerful color is, once they realize it acts as this ultimate bouncer and emotional trigger, they tend to draw a very logical but completely disastrous conclusion.
The novice trap. The assumption that if some color equals attention, then maximum color must equal maximum attention.
I am absolutely guilty of this. I think anyone who has ever had to build a slide deck for a big meeting has done this.
We all have.
You're staring at PowerPoint. You really want the client to notice the Q3 revenue chart, so you make the bars bright, screaming red. But then you also really need them to read the bullet points, so you make those neon green.
Naturally.
Then you want the header to pop, so you make it purple. And suddenly you haven't highlighted anything, you've just created a visual hostage situation.
You've created a monster
Oh,
because you ignored the concept of cognitive load.
cognitive load.
Yeah, the reality, which the manual emphasizes heavily, is that too much color, or more specifically, unharmonious combinations of highly saturated colors, actively repels the viewer.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
If we go back to the bouncer analogy or the survival beacon in the jungle, if I want you to look at me and I put on a head-to-toe neon yellow and hot pink suit, you have to look at me.
I do.
It's impossible to ignore. So why doesn't that work in visual communication?
I will look at you, yes. The primary reflex will trigger,
Yeah.
but I will immediately look away because it physically hurts to sustain that attention.
It hurts.
Yeah, this is called cognitive friction. When you place highly saturated, conflicting colors next to each other, you actually create a phenomenon known as chromatic aberration in the human eye.
Oh, wow. So it's a physical reaction.
Very physical. The lenses in our eyes struggle to focus on different wavelengths simultaneously. The red and the green physically vibrate against each other.
Like those optical illusions that make you dizzy.
Exactly. The brain has to expend a massive amount of metabolic energy to separate the elements and make sense of the noise.
So it causes a literal visual fatigue.
Exactly. And the brain hates expending unnecessary energy.
Yeah.
Faced with that level of cognitive friction, the viewer's subconscious simply commands them to look away to protect their cognitive resources.
That is so interesting.
And furthermore, an overly complex, highly saturated palette fundamentally undermines authority in many contexts.
Give me an example.
Well, you wouldn't use a neon rainbow palette for a legal briefing or a hospital discharge form.
Right, definitely not.
It communicates chaos when the user is desperate for order.
So how do we fix the monster? How do we use multiple colors to differentiate information without triggering that cognitive friction?
The manual offers a highly technical yet incredibly elegant solution utilizing hues of the same value.
Okay, this is where we need to get precise with our language. Because for anyone organizing complex visual systems, understanding the mechanical difference between a hue and a value is the master key.
Let's break it down. A hue is the actual wavelength of the light. It is what we colloquially call the color itself: red, blue, green, yellow.
Got it.
Value, on the other hand, is the relative lightness or darkness of that hue. It is how much white or black is mathematically mixed into the base color.
So a baby blue and a navy blue
Are the exact same hue, but they exist at completely different values.
So the secret to creating a complex palette that doesn't hurt the eyes is to pick a bunch of wildly different hues, maybe a pink, a blue, a green, and an orange, but mathematically lock them in so they all have the exact same level of lightness.
Precisely. When you do that, it removes the cognitive friction because the colors look like they belong to the same physical environment. They share a fundamental underlying characteristic.
They sit on the same optical plane.
Exactly. They sit on the same optical plane of depth.
The manual points to this cover design by Martin Oostra from Amsterdam to illustrate this, and it is a perfect case study in managing cognitive load. It's a magazine cover titled Vruchtbare Aard, which translates to Fertile Earth.
Structurally, it is a plaid pattern, a dense, intersecting grid of vertical and horizontal lines.
And Oostra has used a massive number of different hues here. There are pink lines, yellow lines, blue lines, green, purple, orange.
A lot of hues.
If these were all at maximum neon saturation, looking at this grid would induce a migraine.
But it doesn't.
Yeah.
It looks incredibly soothing, modern, and harmonious. And
Okay.
why? Because Oostra meticulously calibrated the palette so that every single one of those different hues shares the exact same mid-tone value.
They are all slightly desaturated light pastels.
Right, because the value is consistent across the entire board. The multitude of hues doesn't force the eye to constantly refocus. They vibrate together rather than fighting each other.
It's like listening to a choir. You have tenors, sopranos, baritones, all these different vocal ranges which represent the different hues. But if they are all singing at the exact same volume, which is the value, it sounds harmonious. If the tenors are screaming and the sopranos are whispering, it just sounds like a riot.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. I love that. And the manual pushes this idea of harmony even further. It asks, well, what if you rely on the structure so much that you barely need color at all?
Right. It highlights a corporate identity project by an agency called 2FREsh.
This is for business cards, folders, CD covers, standard corporate collateral, and the color palette is basically non-existent.
Yeah, it's entirely reliant on very soft, light values of gray, pure white, and maybe the tiniest, almost imperceptible hint of icy pale blue.
It looks incredibly premium, smooth, and sophisticated. But the obvious question is, if color is the primary driver of attention, and this design has almost no color, why isn't it completely boring?
Why does the eye stay engaged?
Yeah.
Because the visual interest is being carried by the narrative form. They introduced this little 3D rendered, featureless gray character into the design. On the business card, this little gray guy looks like he's physically straining to hold up the weight of the person's name block.
It's very clever.
On the folder, he's walking across the bottom edge carrying a briefcase.
The manual explicitly states that the character adds so much visual interest and narrative intrigue that a highly saturated color palette simply isn't needed.
The form is doing the work of the bouncer.
Exactly. It's a crucial trade-off in visual organization. If your structural form is simple, like a basic bar chart or a plain text poster, you might need bolder color to create visual hierarchy.
Makes sense.
But if your structural form is highly engaging, narrative, or complex, retreating to lighter values or grayscale actually provides a more sophisticated, premium look because it prevents the design from becoming overwhelming.
So, if I'm not supposed to just guess at what looks good together, how does a designer or just someone building a website on Squarespace actually build these harmonious palettes?
The manual marks a distinct shift here from relying on artistic instinct to relying on systems thinking. It emphasizes that the most successful color combinations are mathematically planned ahead of time using specific tools.
It references digital color wheel applications, right? Like Color Scheme Designer or Adobe Color today.
Right. You don't just sit there mixing digital paint. You select one base color that fits your brand, and the algorithm does the rest. It mathematically generates monochromatic, complementary, or triadic groupings based on established color theory.
You can lock the values and adjust the saturation across the entire palette simultaneously. But crucially, and this is a point of absolute necessity for modern communication, these tools allow you to test your palette for accessibility before you ever publish.
This is huge. The manual points out that you can simulate color-impaired sight.
Yes.
Roughly 8% of men and a smaller percentage of women have some form of color vision deficiency. You might design a beautiful infographic where the positive financial growth is green and the negative loss is red.
Classic corporate chart.
To you, it's perfectly clear. But if you run it through a deuteranopia filter simulating red-green color blindness, you might discover that both your red and your green reduce to the exact same muddy shade of yellowish-brown gray.
And your entire organizational system just collapsed for nearly a tenth of your audience.
Exactly. By using these digital tools to plan and test your values, you ensure that your design relies on contrast and luminosity, not just contrast and hue. If the system works in grayscale, it will work for everyone.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time establishing the rules of engagement. We want harmony, we want soothing mid-tone values, we want to avoid cognitive friction and protect the viewer's retinas.
Right, and now we are going to look at exactly when and how to break every single one of those rules.
I love this part. This is where we look at over-the-top contrast. The manual admits that combinations like pure black and neon yellow or fully saturated primary colors fighting each other can be visually startling. It even uses the word garish.
But garish isn't always a failure. Sometimes you want to cause friction.
You want to jolt the viewer out of their passive state.
The manual calls this delivering a visual punch. But the defining factor between a visual punch that works and one that just annoys the viewer comes down to one absolute imperative context.
Context is everything.
Think about the environment where the media will be consumed. If you design a screaming neon yellow and black poster and place it in the middle of Times Square, or in a chaotic, ad-filled subway station,
it might actually become invisible.
Exactly, because the entire environment is already operating at maximum visual volume. It just blends into the noise.
But if you take that exact same neon yellow poster and hang it in the lobby of a minimalist, concrete, brutalist art museum,
it becomes a localized explosion. It commands the space completely.
Wow.
The manual argues that if the output is going to be seen against a muted, neutral, or highly controlled background, leveraging extreme bright colors can be the difference between a mediocre piece of communication and an award-winning one.
But the manual also gets granular about how we actually generate that contrast. It's not just about turning the brightness up to 100 on everything. It breaks down the specific mechanisms of contrast.
Categorizes them cleanly. Contrast can be achieved through hue putting completely different wavelengths next to each other, like red and green. It can be achieved through intensity pairing, a dull, dusty, desaturated red directly against a blinding neon red.
Got it.
It can come from light versus dark value contrast. Or, most powerfully, it can come from placing colors from opposite sides of the color wheel next to each other, which we call complementary contrast.
And this is where the manual moves from physics into anthropology.
Oh, this is fascinating.
This absolutely blew my mind when I read it, because it turns out that contrast isn't just about how wavelengths of light hit the optic nerve. It's about how cultural programming can literally override our biological perception of color.
The cultural implications of color coding. It is arguably the most complex variable in visual organization.
Let me set up the example from the manual because it perfectly proves this point. If I say to you, or anyone listening in North America or Western Europe, I'm designing a poster, and the only two colors I'm using are bright red and forest green. What is your brain's immediate uncontrollable association?
Christmas, Santa Claus, pine trees, holiday sales. The association is so deeply entrenched in the cultural psyche that using red and green for anything else in December feels almost illegal.
Right, it is a seasonal semiotic block. If you use red and green, it looks like a holiday party invitation. But then the manual introduces a design by Marina Cordova Alvestegui from La Paz, Bolivia, and she uses exactly those colors, red and green, to create something that feels entirely devoid of any holiday association.
The composition is visceral. The background is a solid, heavy green. In the center is a graphic, stark white silhouette of a dove, the universal symbol of peace.
Okay.
But cut into the chest of the dove is the shape of a heart. The top half of the heart is green, the bottom half is red, with a red emblem in the center. And falling from the dove are literal drops of red blood splashing into a red splatter at the bottom of the poster.
It is an intense, heavy political piece of art. And when you look at it, your brain doesn't even whisper the word Christmas. How does a designer successfully fight against a cultural association that strong?
Because in the context of Bolivia, the combination of green, yellow, and red carries a much heavier, much more urgent semiotic weight. They are the colors of the national flag.
Ah, of course.
The manual explains that this design is a direct commentary on political or social unrest in the region. The dove of peace is literally bleeding the colors of the nation. The cultural weight of patriotism, national identity, and political struggle completely overpowers the trivial seasonal association of red and green.
The context rewires the optical processing.
Yes, exactly.
It's a masterclass in hijacking existing neural pathways. And the manual shows another brilliant manipulation of patriotism with a poster by Dr. Alderit from Mexico City.
This one is incredibly aggressive. It's a total explosion of red, white, and blue.
Now, globally, red, white, and blue usually signifies institutional authority. The USA, the UK, France. It's the color palette of government documents, political campaigns, solemn patriotism, and military recruitment.
It is the palette of the establishment.
Exactly. But Dr. Alderit weaponizes those establishment colors to create something totally ironic and subversive. The poster is this dense, vibrating, comic book style illustration.
I love this one.
Right. In the dead center is a massive stylized head of a man wearing a blue lucha libre wrestling mask, like a superhero mask with a giant white A on the forehead.
Swarming around his head are these dynamic retro illustrations of soccer players in midair bicycle-kicking soccer balls.
The background is a dizzying pattern of concentric circles in bright red and blue, layered with white stars and comic book half-tone dots. The text reads, Lucha Libre, Sueño Americano, the American Dream.
What Alderit is doing here is semiotic judo.
Semiotic judo.
Yeah, he is taking the rigid institutional weight of the red, white, and blue and aggressively applying it to a chaotic, energetic pop culture mashup of Mexican wrestling, soccer, and pulp comics. The manual points out that by subverting the traditional application of these colors, he creates a highly lively, ironic commentary on the American dream itself.
He uses the establishment's colors to mock the establishment. It's so loud and so clever. Speaking of loud, the manual highlights an example of intentional intensity by Walter Daniel Cucuri Ultra from Venezuela that literally makes my eyes vibrate.
Yes, this piece relies on a very specific technical color palette. Cyan blue, magenta pink, yellow, and black.
The CMYK printing process colors.
Exactly, but instead of using them to print a photograph, he cranks them up to maximum unadulterated saturation and uses them as solid shapes.
It's intense.
Very. The image consists of overlapping, transparent, almost ghostly silhouettes of human figures. As these highly saturated shapes overlap, they create secondary colors. A translucent cyan figure overlaps a yellow one to create a jarring green.
Right.
A magenta figure overlaps a cyan one to create a deep purple. And this is all set against either a blinding stark white or a glaring yellow background.
The manual says the strength of these colors gives the design a feeling of intensity that is intentional, even though it is extremely bright. When I look at it, it actually makes me feel a little dizzy and disoriented.
Which is precisely the designer's intent. They are using color contrast to induce a mild physiological stress response in the viewer to match the energy of the subject matter.
Wow. But contrast doesn't always have to be an assault on the senses, does it? The manual provides an example from the Willoughby Design Group that shows how contrast can actually create an optical illusion of luxury.
This is a beautiful piece of corporate collateral, a brochure or menu for a restaurant called Feng, and it relies on a very tight two-color pairing. A dark, rich brown placed immediately adjacent to a bright, vibrant, high-saturation orange.
If you look at a swatch of dark brown isolated on a white screen, it often looks muddy, dull, or uninviting.
But when you place it directly next to that high-saturation orange, the physics of the eye alter your perception. The brightness of the orange forces your photoreceptors to dial down their sensitivity slightly. In response, the dark brown appears significantly deeper, warmer, and more luxurious than it actually is. The manual notes that the contrast makes the brown look rich and velvety. The bright color elevates the dark color.
Okay, so we've covered the spectrum. We know how to soothe the brain with harmony, and we know how to electrocute the brain with extreme contrast. But right in the middle of all this high-level color theory, the manual drops a massive, unforgiving reality check.
Section 4. The absolute supremacy of legibility. Because all of the semiotic theory and chromatic contrast in the world is utterly useless if the biological hardware of the viewer cannot decipher the letters on the page.
I think every single person listening to this has experienced the exact scenario I'm about to describe.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
You go to a trendy, high-end, dimly lit restaurant. The waiter hands you the menu, and the designer, in their infinite wisdom, decided it would look incredibly sleek, minimalist, and refined to print 8-point, ultra-thin, light gray font on dark charcoal gray matte paper.
It's the worst.
You sit there at your candlelit table, and you literally have to pull out your smartphone, turn on the flashlight, and squint like you're cracking a safe just to figure out what the appetizers are.
It is the ultimate failure of visual organization. The designer allowed their ego, or their pursuit of an aesthetic ideal, to completely destroy the functional utility of the object.
Yeah.
The manual is incredibly stern about this trap. It flatly states, don't let the design overtake legibility.
But why does this happen so often? Why do smart designers make such functionally broken choices?
Because of a disconnect in environments.
What do you mean?
Well, the designer is sitting in a perfectly illuminated studio. They're looking at a massive, high-resolution, backlit monitor where every pixel is perfectly rendered. In that pristine, controlled environment, the subtle 10% tonal variation between a light gray letter and a dark gray background looks incredibly sophisticated. You can appreciate the high degree of subtlety.
But the manual points out the harsh truth. The real world is not a backlit monitor in a pristine studio.
Exactly. The manual warns that to other viewers, those slight differences can be confusing and often go completely unnoticed. These subtle tonal decisions fail catastrophically in real-life situations.
This feels like it connects to what we were saying earlier about designing for the reality of the audience.
It anchors to a core tenet of mass communication. You have to design for physical degradation and environmental variables. You have to consider the aging human eye.
Right.
As we get older, the lens inside the eye naturally thickens and yellows. It lets in less light, and it severely reduces contrast sensitivity. A 60-year-old executive looking at your slide deck literally perceives less contrast than the 25-year-old designer who built it.
Wow, I never thought of it that way.
You also have to consider someone reading your poster through a rain-streaked bus window, or looking at your app on a phone with a smudged screen and glaring sunlight.
If the text is illegible, the viewer doesn't try harder to decode your brilliant aesthetic. They just leave. The connection is severed instantly.
So to prevent this, the manual offers very rigid guidelines on where colored text actually belongs.
It says colored or gray text is highly effective, but only when used for specific structural elements. Sidebars, callouts, large headings, massive scale posters, and environmental signage.
Notice what is explicitly excluded from that list.
Body copy.
Body copy. Paragraphs of text. The core narrative. For body copy, you must rely on extreme, unambiguous contrast. Generally, that means pure black ink on a clean white background or pure white text on a dark background.
Well, let's look at how the professionals balance intense color with absolute legibility. Sebastian Guarini designed a series of promotional banners for what appears to be a nursing assistant certification program.
These banners are designed for environmental scale. They are meant to be hung in busy hospital hallways or across public streets. They have to capture attention from 50 feet away.
To act as the bouncer, the backgrounds of these banners are flooded with incredibly bright, solid colors. One is a vivid cyan, another is a deep, warm, radiating orange. They are loud.
But crucially, when it comes to the typography, the actual information about the program, what does Guarini do?
The text is pure, unadulterated white, bold, and clean.
He doesn't try to use a slightly darker orange text on a light orange background. The manual points out that using clean white text against those highly saturated colors ensures maximum legibility from a distance. High contrast guarantees the message survives the environment.
Then there's this really beautiful example of collateral material by Garth Walker from South Africa. It looks like a complex magazine spread or a booklet.
Walker's design is heavily layered, almost maximalist. It features full-color photographic imagery, heavy textures, and large, colorful graphic, typography-like, overlapping, transparent cyan, magenta, and yellow letters spelling out display words.
It is a highly stimulating visual environment.
Like right in the middle of all that visual excitement, there are paragraphs of actual narrative text that need to be read. And Walker just drops all the tricks. He carves out a clean, stark white box in the middle of the layout.
Oh, that's smart.
And inside that box, the body text is set in an elegant, simple black ink.
He creates a safe harbor for cognitive processing.
Exactly. He uses the complex color and texture to draw the reader into the page. But he uses high contrast black and white to ensure they don't fatigue while reading the actual story.
Even when you are forced to layer text directly over complex, noisy backgrounds, you have to be careful. The manual shows a poster by Juan Carlos Darius Corpus from Venezuela. The background is a dense collage of layered, textured, abstract shapes in blues, reds, and blacks.
If he'd used black text, it would have vanished into the dark shapes. If he'd used a color, it would have vibrated against the background.
So he uses typography that is beautifully flowing, almost calligraphic, and renders it in pure, stark white. It floats above the noise. It doesn't try to compete with the textured shapes. It establishes an entirely separate visual layer.
Okay, so we've established how color grabs attention, how it creates emotional context, and how it must serve legibility. Now we pivot to arguably the most practical application in the entire manual.
I'm ready.
This is where we move from color as an aesthetic choice to color as pure structural data.
Let's get into it. The concept of coding with color.
This is the essence of systems thinking in design. When you are tasked with organizing a massive volume of information, say a 300-page annual financial report, a complex e-commerce website with thousands of SKUs, or a wayfinding system for an international airport, you constantly have to ask yourself a binary question.
Am I trying to show the user that these pieces of information are fundamentally different, or am I trying to show them that they are related?
The manual breaks this down into two distinct strategies, using color to signal difference and using color to signal similarity.
Let's start with difference, as it's the most intuitive.
The classic example is a heavy reference textbook. If you look at the foredge of the book, you see a small red tab printed on the edge of the pages for Chapter 1 and a blue tab for Chapter 2.
That tiny color shift instantly communicates to the reader that they have crossed a boundary and entered a new category of information.
In a hospital setting, difference coding is a matter of life and death. A red line painted on the floor guides you to the emergency room. A blue line guides you to the maternity ward. The distinct hues categorize the physical space.
But how do we use color to do the opposite? How do we use color to unify a massive, sprawling document so it feels like one cohesive system?
The manual states that the key to unifying a document with color is relentless repetition. You have to repeat the color's location and application so consistently that the reader subconsciously learns the system.
Right.
If, throughout a 50-page report, every single chart title is a specific shade of teal and every single footnote line is that same teal, the reader's brain quickly learns the rule teal equals supporting data. You are training their cognitive expectations.
The manual lays out the golden rule of coding. It must be clear, simple, and consistent. But here's where we hit a massive stumbling block.
Oh yeah.
This is a trap that trips up so many people trying to build corporate templates. The manual calls it the paradox of value.
This is an incredibly nuanced and vital concept. Let's create a hypothetical scenario. You are a project manager. You need to create a series of 5 distinct brochures for 5 different departments in your company: HR, finance, marketing, sales, and legal.
Okay, standard corporate task.
You want the brochures to look like they belong to the same company, but you need them to be distinctly different, so employees don't grab the wrong one.
The novice approach, trying to stay on brand, would be to say, okay, our corporate color is blue. So HR gets a dark navy blue cover. Finance gets a medium dark blue. Marketing gets a standard blue. Sales gets a light blue. Legal gets a pale baby blue.
You are using different values of the exact same hue to indicate difference.
Which seems logical.
But what actually happens in the human brain when it sees those 5 brochures lined up on a table? The manual explicitly warns that values that are too closely related cause cognitive confusion.
So it backfires.
Exactly. Using a range of similar values of the same hue might inadvertently communicate similarity rather than difference. The viewer's brain, trying to simplify the data, just groups them all as the blue brochures.
Worse, they might just assume it's the exact same brochure, but the printer was slowly running out of ink on the lighter ones. The contrast isn't stark enough to register as distinct categories.
It fails the test of clarity. So how do you solve the paradox? How do you make them look related but distinctly different?
You mathematically flip the equation. To code items in a series as related but distinct, you use different hues that share a similar value.
Oh, we're back to the harmony trick with the plaid magazine cover.
Exactly. We're applying the aesthetic theory of harmony to a functional organizational problem. Let's look at how Satoru Yamazaki executed this with a packaging design for a brand called LBK in Tokyo.
Imagine 3 spools of beautifully printed decorative ribbon. Each spool is a completely different product line, so they need to be distinctly identifiable.
Yamazaki gives each ribbon a completely different dominant color palette. One ribbon is primarily deep magenta and crimson red. The second is primarily soft pinks and warm tans. The third is primarily cool cyan and deep sea blues.
They're completely different hues. A customer would never accidentally pick up the blue ribbon thinking it was the red ribbon. They clearly indicate difference.
But when you look at them side by side, they absolutely look like they belong to the same family. They look like a cohesive collection.
Because Yamazaki meticulously ensured that all 3 ribbons utilize colors in the exact same value range. The dark red and the dark blue have the same level of depth. The light pink and the light cyan share the same brightness.
That is so smart.
That shared value structure, combined with the consistent repeating geometric pattern and the exact same typography for the logo on all 3 schools, firmly anchors them to the same brand. The hue says, I'm a unique product, but the value says, I belong to this company.
It's brilliant systems design. Let's look at another example of building a system, this one by Finn Nygaard. He designed a protective slipcase that holds several different publications inside it.
This perfectly illustrates the dual nature of coding. When the books are inside the slipcase and sitting on a shelf, all you see are the individual spines of the books.
And each spine is flooded with a wildly different, highly saturated, solid color. One spine is bright red, the next is green, the next is yellow, the next is blue. It loudly screams difference. You immediately know these are distinct volumes.
What happens when you pull the books out of the slipcase and lay them flat on a table?
The covers of all the books, regardless of the spine color, share a consistent, repeating decorative pattern. A subtle, textured graphic that covers the front and back. So the spines shout difference for the sake of utility, but the covers whisper unity for the sake of the brand.
And the agency Maris executed a similar strategy for a product line in New York City.
Oh, right.
The manual describes how individual items within this diverse product line are given their own dominant tone. Maybe the shampoo box is primarily blue, the conditioner is purple, the lotion is green.
But to prevent the line from looking like a chaotic mess on the retail shelf, they run diverse, repeating visual patterns across the entire line.
The shared pattern allows the wildly different colored items to be perceived as a cohesive, premium whole.
Okay, so we've got our systemic rules established. Now we have to actually lay out the pages of our massive document. This brings us to the architecture of information.
Designing a 50-page annual report or a 200-page catalog is an entirely different psychological challenge than designing a single poster.
For sure.
With a poster, you are trying to capture their attention for 3 seconds as they walk by. With a multi-page document, you are asking for an investment of time. You are trying to sustain a relationship.
The manual makes a very bold, almost reductive claim here. It says the primary overriding goal of working with multi-page documents is simply to motivate the viewer to turn the page.
It sounds overly simplistic, but it's a profound shift in perspective. If the reader gets fatigued on page 4 and closes the report, the design of pages 5 through 50 is irrelevant. It has failed.
So how do we use color to compel someone to keep turning the page?
By using color to create sequential rhythm and manage cognitive load. You have to organize the massive wall of text so it feels digestible and manageable, not overwhelming.
The manual talks about applying color to simple graphic elements to create structural landmarks. It's not just about splashing a color background behind text. It's about using a thin red line, or rule, to guide the eye down the column. It's using a specific shade of blue just for the headlines.
Or using color to call out a specific subspace on a page. If you have a massive block of dense text, and you put a short case study inside a softly colored bounding box, you are telling the reader, you can pause the main narrative and read this short self-contained story. It breaks up the monotony.
You are literally drawing a map for the reader's brain. If the reader understands the map, if they learn on page 1 that red lines mean a new topic is starting, and blue boxes mean a quick definition, they can navigate the rest of the document with significantly less anxiety. They know what to expect.
Predictability reduces cognitive fatigue. And nowhere is cognitive fatigue a bigger risk than in data visualization. The manual spends significant time on infographics.
Infographics are tough because they have competing mandates. On one hand, you want the infographic to look incredibly cool, modern, and visually arresting to draw the reader in. On the other hand, its entire functional purpose is to clearly, unambiguously differentiate complex data sets.
And those two mandates are often at war with each other. If you make it too highly styled or apply too many vibrant colors just to make it pop, the actual data points get lost in the visual noise.
The manual makes a really great point here. It says that icons and simplified illustrations don't always need color if the shape is strong enough.
Right.
If you have a perfectly designed, simple silhouette of a house representing real estate data, you don't need to color the house bright blue just to make it pretty. The shape is already doing the communication. Adding color just adds unnecessary load.
But when color is used in an infographic, it must carry precise meaning. It cannot be decorative. Look at the example provided of a diagram by Mark Rabinowitz detailing the human circulatory system.
It is a beautiful, highly stylized piece of graphic art. It uses complex typography and elegant lines, but at its core, it is an infographic meant to explain biology. And to do that, Rabinowitz relies on a universally understood, globally recognized biological color code.
He uses red on the right side of the diagram and blue on the left side.
Alongside the directional arrows, that stark binary separation of red and blue instantly intuitively emphasizes the direction that oxygen-rich blood, the red and oxygen-poor blood, the blue, moves through the circulatory system.
The color is not there to make the diagram look nice. The color is the data.
The manual distills this down into 3 very specific, actionable tips for using color in infographics that I think anyone making a chart needs to write down. Number 1, consider what exact role color can play in communicating the specific information. Is the color defining categories, or is it showing a sequential progression?
Number 2, determine where the finished graphic will physically be placed. Will there be competing hues, photographs, or heavy textures on the page immediately surrounding it? An infographic needs to maintain its own visual integrity and stand out from its environment.
And number 3, develop a palette that actively enhances the text and visuals, helps reveal hidden information, and starkly shows the differences between parts or ideas.
To see how this macro organization worked on a layout scale, the manual points to work by the Agency Subcommunication from Montreal. They designed a printed schedule, or timetable.
Timetables are notoriously the most boring, anxiety-inducing, hard-to-read documents on Earth. Think of a train schedule. It is just endless rows and columns of tiny, dense numerical text. Your eye constantly loses its place.
But Subcommunication solves the tracking problem with color banding. They apply distinct, soft, low-value background colors to different horizontal sections of the schedule. One block of 5 rows has a very pale pink background. The next block of rows has a pale green background. The next is pale yellow.
It physically separates the information types. Your eye can track all the way across the page horizontally from left to right without accidentally skipping down a line, because your peripheral vision just keeps you securely within the green river of color. It takes an impenetrable wall of dense text columns and makes them instantly readable.
The manual also highlights the work of Alex Gerard, who uses the separation of different colored sections to allow dense information to be communicated clearly and concisely, proving that color blocking is one of the most effective tools for spatial organization.
Okay, we're entering the final frontier of the manual, and this is where the rules of physics, as we've discussed them so far, start to bend because the medium changes completely.
Right.
We are moving from ink on paper to the digital frontier screens, motion, and media.
Everything we have discussed, from the subtle value matching of the Plaid magazine cover to the high contrast of the CMYK poster, assumes one critical thing: that the designer has absolute control over how the final product is printed and displayed.
Which they don't on screens.
Exactly. As we know, the vast majority of visual communication today happens on screens, and screens are inherently volatile, uncontrollable environments.
I think about this constantly. A web designer will spend hours calibrating their monitor, picking the exact, perfect, mathematically precise shade of subtle peach for a brand's new website. They launch it, and then the client looks at the website on a 6-year-old laptop monitor with the brightness turned down to 10% to save battery.
With a yellow night mode blue light filter turned on.
Yes. And they call the designer furious, asking, Why is my new website muddy brown? You cannot control the user's hardware.
The manual explicitly addresses this modern reality. Monitors, mobile devices, and tablets display colors drastically differently based on their calibration. Furthermore, user control over brightness and contrast means that if the user's screen brightness is dialed down, all your careful, subtle color work will simply appear dull, crushed, and illegible.
So how does a digital designer overcome the fact that they are designing for a million different unpredictable environments?
You have to design with higher tolerances. You cannot rely on razor-thin, subtle differences in value to separate critical information, because a bad monitor will just crush those values together into a single, indistinguishable blob. You need more robust contrast.
Makes total sense.
But beyond the hardware limitations, the manual points out a fundamental psychological difference when designing for screens.
It calls it a lack of tactile experience.
Think about the physical act of reading a printed annual report. You feel the weight of the paper, you notice the texture of the matte finish, you engage physically by turning the page. The ambient light in the room casts subtle shadows across the spread. All of that physical data provides context, depth, and spatial orientation.
A screen has none of that. A screen is a flat, smooth piece of illuminated glass. It is entirely static, two-dimensional space.
Because the medium is physically flat, color has to do double the heavy lifting to create what the manual calls a virtual depth of field.
You have to simulate the physical world.
Exactly. You use color to simulate space and hierarchy. Darker, cooler colors might be used to make backgrounds recede into the distance, while brighter, warmer colors might be used on buttons or alerts to make them physically pop forward on the z-axis toward the user. Color enhances the flat space and gives it architecture.
But sometimes the best way to manage the digital space is to exercise extreme restraint. A great example in the text of navigating this digital flatness is the website designed by the O Group in New York City.
This site is a masterclass in digital minimalism and structural restraint. The primary color palette for this entire digital experience is reduced to just 3 elements, varying shades of gray, pure white, and a very light airy blue.
It is practically monochromatic, so if they aren't using bright red or neon green to scream at the user about where to click or what to look at, how does the user know how to navigate the site?
Because they rely entirely on structural placement and established cognitive web conventions. They use a persistent left-side navigation bar. The hierarchy of information is conveyed through the physical placement of elements on the grid, rather than relying on color to yell, "click here." The subtle palette creates a calm, premium environment that trusts the user to understand the architecture.
And then there is the web design by projects, which takes a similar minimalist approach, but for a very different reason. This is an online portfolio site for an architecture firm.
Right. They utilize a unique, highly structured, gridded navigation system. And the text, the menus, and the background overlays are all a completely neutral, simple, stark white.
Why build a completely colorless interface?
Because they are laying that white grid directly over massive, full-color, gorgeous, highly detailed architectural photographs. When your ultimate goal is to showcase the product, in this case, the physical buildings using a neutral, transparent color palette for the interface, allows the product to shine without interference. The interface politely gets out of the way.
But whether you are going for a stark minimalist white grid or a maximalist colorful web experience, the manual lays down one massive, non-negotiable rule for digital design.
You must test it in the native environment.
Always test the design online on various browsers and specifically on the actual mobile devices where users will view the content before going live.
And this rigorous testing connects back to a larger corporate goal creating and maintaining brand trust. The manual notes a critical challenge for modern brands.
Right.
If a client has both an on-screen presence, a website, an app, and a physical print presence, packaging, business cards, retail signage, the colors used in all iterations must be perceived as consistent and recognizable.
If your logo is a vibrant, specific cherry red on your physical product packaging, but because of bad digital color management, it looks dull maroon on your e-commerce website, you are subtly damaging brand trust.
Yeah, the user's brain registers the inconsistency and it breeds subconscious skepticism.
Now that covers static digital design, but what happens when the digital space starts moving? What happens when we introduce time into the equation with motion graphics, animation, and video?
This is a totally different ballgame because the variables multiply exponentially.
Yeah, no kidding.
The manual notes that motion media offers unique opportunities. When working with a sequence of still images or live-action video footage, you can use color grading to connect otherwise completely unrelated visual elements.
You can take a chaotic mix of mismatched, poor quality stock videos, some shot in bright sunlight, some shot in a dark room, throw a highly stylized, cohesive color filter over the entire sequence, and suddenly they look like they belong in the exact same high-end commercial. Color creates continuity across time.
To manage this complex medium, the manual lays out 6 specific, vital goals for managing color in motion media. Goal number 1 is perhaps the most important. Reduce the time it takes for viewers to comprehend information.
In a printed magazine, a reader can stare at an infographic for 5 minutes if they want to. In a video ad, that image might only be on screen for 1.5 seconds. The color coding must communicate the idea instantly before the scene cuts.
Goal number 2. If there is text on screen, make it readable. Again, legibility is king. This is exponentially harder in video because the text might be moving and the background behind the text is constantly shifting in color and value.
Goal 3. Use color hierarchy to reveal the relative importance of moving elements. Guide the eye to what matters in the frame.
Goal 4. Create a color palette that is specifically engineered for on-screen viewing. This means utilizing the expansive RGB color space, which uses light to create bright, luminous colors, rather than being constrained by the duller CMYK color space used for printing physical ink.
Goal 5. Use specific hues and tones to actively enhance the message and set the psychological mood of the animation.
And finally, Goal 6. Use repeated visual elements or signature colors throughout the timeline to create a unified, cohesive look and feel across the entire animation, from the opening frame to the closing logo.
A really beautiful example of executing all these goals is a promotional animation designed by the studio Interspectacular and Liz DeLuna in New York City.
It is a dynamic, moving piece of digital media, but it deliberately restricts itself to a limited, highly controlled palette of cool greens and soft blues.
The manual says this animation is particularly successful because, despite being a digital screen-based medium, it incorporates visual elements and textures that have a hand-done and organic look.
By combining the specific calming hues of green and blue with those textural analog accents, they soften the harshness of the digital screen. They make the motion graphic feel crafted, predictable, and highly engaging. They use color to dictate the entire atmosphere of the digital space.
This has been an incredibly dense, eye-opening journey through just a single chapter of this manual. We've covered evolutionary biology, the physics of light, cultural programming, and the mechanics of legibility.
To synthesize everything we've pulled from these pages, if there is one core, overriding insight to take away, it is this color is the loudest, fastest, and most primitive communicator we have at our disposal. It hits the brain before words, before shapes, before logic. It dictates emotion and categorizes data instantly. But its power is not absolute.
Right.
Its effectiveness is entirely dependent on context, on mathematical harmony, and on a deep empathetic understanding of the limitations of the human visual system. Graphic design is not about making things look pretty. It is about organizing the chaos of the world so it can be efficiently understood.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. I want to leave you with a final challenge, a little piece of homework for your eyeballs. The next time you open your favorite food delivery app on your phone, or the next time you walk down the sprawling cereal aisle of a massive grocery store, try to actively turn off your brain's automatic subconscious processing. Just for 1 minute, look at the colors as data. Are they using high saturation, contrasting neon hues to scream at your peripheral vision from the bottom shelf? Or are they using subtle, harmonious, tightly controlled tonal values to gently, calmly guide your finger toward the Buy Now button? You're being visually organized, directed, and influenced every single second